Good evening, dear YouTubers. Welcome to Real Turkey channel. This is your loving, caring host, Atilla Yeşilada. This time solo, but we're going to have more guests in future programs, hopefully move to studio production, as well as expand our scope to other emerging markets, based on the few comments that come from you. We have already done South Africa, and hopefully we'll be covering all of the major emerging markets throughout the course of the year. Today we're sticking to Turkey, and I may be stuttering and hesitating because this is a very sensitive subject. Unfortunately, it is also one of the leading topics in Turkey and around the world. And I would be remiss if I didn't represent this side, this dark side of Turkey to you. I'm going to talk about LGBTQ rights and discrimination against these people by the government of Erdogan administration. This video consists of three sections. First of all, why the sudden hatred against LGBTQ rights. Secondly, they are not the only group that are being discriminated against. I want to add Kurds and Alevites, or Alevis, depending on who is pronouncing. And finally, the social, but more importantly, the economic impact of discrimination, any discrimination, ethnic discrimination, gender discrimination, discrimination based on sexual preference, etc., etc. It is one of those invisible barriers or obstacles that hampers not only growth, but also development and leads to brain drain. Now let's get to the topic. The latest attack by the government and by Turkey's Directorate of Religious Affairs, Diyanet, which is the highest position for Sunni Muslims in Turkey, sort of like a diocese or archbishop, I suppose, to make a comparison to Christianity and to make the subject more accessible, have called LGBTQ perverts. Today, in fact, Mr. Erdogan was addressing a youth congress or convention of his party, and he said, don't be like those terrorists, LGBTQ people. Honor your ancestors and remain decent and heterosexual, I suppose. I don't know. The latest clash came because of protests in one of Istanbul's most prestigious universities, called Bosporus University. There, AKP appointed a former candidate for the Grand Assembly and a man who is simply not qualified by the university standards as the president of the university, Melih Bulu. Since then, the students are protesting, the faculty is protesting, and Mr. Melih Bulu can't really find a vice president or deans because the staff, the faculty, refuse to work with him. Is Melih Bulu a bad man? No, I don't know him. He looks rather pleasant on TV, but he's certainly not qualified. And the idea of Mr. Erdogan appointing someone outside the Bosporus University faculty is against the conventions, time-honored conventions of the university, and they are doing the right thing by protesting. But of course, immediately provocation and demonization took place. Provocation, some ultra-left groups have joined the protests, which happens everywhere. I mean, there is nothing you can do about it. Protest, by definition, is a freedom of expression issue, and anyone who wants to express their freedom, or their freedom to express, will express it there. LGBTQ people were among them, and there was a raid to their offices where a poster was found, which is insulting to traditional Muslim. I admit that. Uh, I don't want to get into details, not because I want to be an advocate for LGBTs, but I think, for my Muslim audience, it could be insulting to talk about their holy places, and uh, uh, sacrilegious rituals. This is why I'm gonna cut it short. By the way, I'm a deist, but I have respect for all the religions on the world as long as they don't demand human sacrifice. In addition to that, in addition to this poster, which in the majority of most Sunni Muslims would be offensive, they also found material related to PKK, Turkey's notorious terror organization. Now, I have met a lot of people with different sexual preferences, gays and lesbians, and to a lesser extent, bisexuals and transsexuals. They can be accused of anything, but they don't have an inclination to join terror organizations. In fact, they are rather peaceful people, the live and let live kind of people. So that is demonization and possibly police trapping or setting a trap for these poor people. And as I've said, the chairperson of the head imam of Turkey, uh, the head of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, called them perverts. This is really insulting, and it's just so 19th century. We now know that you cannot, by force or even by suasion, change people's sexual preferences. We are the way God created us. Some of us are wired to be heterosexuals, some not. And I don't really see any difference between me and a gay or a lesbian or, transsexual person. But this discrimination is extremely offensive because Turkey has a very large LGBT community. And so far, even though the practice wasn't it wasn't, officially allowed, nobody really attacked these people. They lived in peace, though, of course, away from the public eye. Now, they are being officially discriminated against, and this is a serious problem, not only for these people who tend to be more creative and more artistically oriented and better educated, but also for other groups in Turkey. Whom else is this government discriminating against? Kurds. Not all Kurds, but left-wing Kurds who think their region deserves autonomy. Kurds who vote for the pro-Kurdish rights party HDP. And Alevites or Alevis, which is a different faith in Muslim. It's not Shia, it's not Sunni, it is a uniquely Anatolian mix or synthesis of Islam with the previous cultures or faiths that Turks had practiced. Once again, I'm not an Alevite, and I know if I use the wrong words, I may be offending these gentle and very beautiful people, so I'm going to cut it short. But they are very different than Sunnis, and they are being discriminated against. What do I mean by discriminated against? Well, they're persecuted. Kurds, LGBTQ, and Alevis. B, they don't qualify for state jobs. If they come out of their closets, they are usually shunned from the business and social life. If they own a business, they are usually not given any tenders by the government, which is really a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous loss for the society. There are no concrete statistics, but the studies I have read suggest that 10 to 15% of Turkish citizens may have Kurdish origin or may consider themselves Kurds. A similar portion, somewhat overlapping with Kurds but not that much, are also Alevites or Alevis. As far as it comes to LGBTQ, we have pretty solid studies from across the world in fact, not only human, but in high mammal societies. 8, 11, 18% of any given population tends to be non-heterosexual. Let me just put it this way. So it's a natural fact that happens to everyone. But look at the figures here. I mean, you are essentially isolating and building barriers between 33% and the rest of the society in terms of employment opportunities, their honor and dignity, and their ability for economic advancement. Imagine what a huge loss that is for a country like Turkey, which is already suffering 26% unemployment, and it really doesn't create or innovate, simply because at the very young age, we start teaching everyone, and then we practice segmenting the society along these castes, along gender, along ethnicity, along sexual preferences. And of course, those which are in the minorities don't contribute to the economy. They don't contribute sufficiently to the social development of the country. And as a result, they migrate. Today, you would see a lot of Turkish artists, authors, creative people living abroad just because their sexual preferences are not acceptable or accepted in Turkey. Similarly, there is a huge Kurdish diaspora, in particular in the northern parts of Europe. And Alevites are heavily represented among Turks in Germany. And all of these people, as groups, hold a grudge against the government of Turkey. And, they obviously stage negative propaganda. I don't blame them. I mean, essentially, they have been forced to leave their countries. So not only do this act of discrimination cause brain drain, it also creates a diaspora, which is not one of the greatest pillars of support outside the nation, but essentially disgruntled people who feel they have been expelled from their home country and hold a grudge against the government. Imagine what a nasty situation that is. I mean, imagine if you're an American, think of an American expat community of 10 million in Europe or in Asia, most of which are engaged in anti-government propaganda. I'm sure you won't be too happy. Or if you're British, the same situation applies. And you know what's the funny thing? The Ottomans, to which Mr. Erdogan constantly harks back to, didn't really care about sexual preferences. In fact, several Ottoman emperors had both male and female harems. I don't know how they interpreted the religion, but not only emperors, but wealthy people took gay mistresses and lovers. And it was sort of like, a fact of society that nobody much cared about. The same thing with Kurds. A Kurd was considered a privileged citizen of the Ottoman Empire, a privileged subject, because he or she is Muslim. The same thing with Alevites. In fact, Bektashis, an Alevite denomination or church, was heavily organized in Balkans and among Turkey's crack infantry called Yeniseri, and they were instrumental in the Muslimization of Balkans. Coming from such a past where not only religious but also sexual tolerance was widely practiced, at least no one made an issue out of it, to this point where as I have calculated, roughly a third of the society is put aside and cast as undesirables or persecuted is a horrendous situation. And it is one of the biggest shortcomings or failings of the AKP government. I hope things get better, but I doubt they will in the short run, because AKP cleverly uses these acts of polarization or discrimination to consolidate its conservative Islamic base, as well as to hide the dismal state of the economy. The day this new attack of hatred against the LGBTQ started, natural gas prices, internet prices, and then sugar prices were raised. While we were busy debating whether LGBTQ is actually sinners or just people like us with different sexual preferences, on the slide, the government was raising prices. It is that kind of a country. I, personally think it is Turkey's loss to exclude its most talented, creative, and hardworking people from many aspects of social and economic life, and Turkey will suffer tremendously for this mistake. Well, this has been another broadcast. Hopefully soon I'll be back with guests again. You have watched another episode of Real Turkey Channel presented by Atilla Eşulada. Please stay home and stay healthy.